Picture this: a moonlit night in ancient Egypt, where a group of priests gathers in a hidden chamber beneath the sands. They chant in a language long forgotten, their voices rising and falling in rhythms that seem to bend the very air around them. At the center of the room, a statue of a jackal-headed god begins to glow, though no flame touches it. To our modern eyes, this scene makes no sense. How could words alone make stone shimmer? What kind of knowledge did these people possess that we've lost entirely? This isn't just a scene from a fantasy tale. It's one of countless rituals from history that defy all logic. Rituals so strange that even today, historians and scientists can only scratch their heads in bewilderment. From the depths of time, civilizations across the globe practiced ceremonies that seem impossible, unsettling, or outright bizarre by today's standards. Some were meant to summon rain from cloudless skies, others to commune with spirits, and a few even involved rituals so secret that their true purpose died with those who performed them. These weren't mere superstitions, they were sacred acts woven into the fabric of entire cultures, believed to hold real power. Yet now they lie forgotten, their meanings blurred by centuries, leaving us with only fragments of their mysteries. That's exactly what we're uncovering today: 25 of the most astonishing lost rituals that still baffle experts. These aren't just odd historical footnotes, they're windows into a world where the boundaries between the possible and the impossible were far less rigid. Why did the Mayans believe bloodletting could speak to the gods? How did Viking warriors enter battle convinced they were immune to steel? And what twisted ceremony involved dancing until collapse or worse? The answers lie ahead, and trust me, they'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the past. So settle in, because history is about to get a lot stranger. Deep in the heart of ancient Greece, hidden among olive groves just outside Athens, an eerie ceremony unfolded once a year that would shape the course of Western spirituality. The Eleusinian Mysteries weren't just another religious festival, they were the best-kept secret of the ancient world, a ritual so powerful that initiates would rather face death than reveal what happened inside that sacred hall. For nearly 2,000 years, from around 1500 BC to the 4th century CE, thousands of Greeks, philosophers, emperors, even slaves underwent this initiation. And yet, to this day, no one knows exactly what they witnessed. The ritual was tied to the myth of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and her daughter Persephone's abduction into the underworld. Participants reenacted this harrowing tale, but what came next was no simple play. Ancient accounts hint at an experience so overwhelming it shattered their perception of reality. Some spoke of blinding lights, others of an otherworldly presence. A few whispered about visions so vivid they believed they'd crossed into the realm of the gods. The secret was guarded with terrifying intensity. Betraying the rites carried a penalty of execution, and even accidental leaks could spark exile. Modern scholars have pieced together tantalizing clues. One theory suggests initiates drank a potent psychedelic brew called kykeon, made from barley infected with ergot, a fungus containing compounds similar to LSD. This could explain the vivid hallucinations described in fragmented texts. Others argue the rituals used carefully choreographed darkness, chanting, and sensory deprivation to induce transcendental states. But the most chilling detail, despite countless initiates across centuries, including figures like Plato and Cicero, not a single one broke their oath. Whatever they saw in that hall at Eleusis, it was powerful enough to silence them forever. What makes the Eleusinian Mysteries uniquely unsettling isn't just the secrecy, it's the transformative effect on those who experienced it. Ancient writers claim the ritual erased their fear of death, granting them a glimpse of the afterlife so real it changed them permanently. Unlike other mystery cults, this wasn't about secret knowledge or coded teachings. It was a visceral, possibly chemical, confrontation with the divine. And that's the haunting question that lingers. Did they stumble upon some ancient neurotechnology, a way to hack human consciousness that we still don't understand? The ruins of Eleusis still stand today, but the truth died with the last initiate, leaving us only with echoes of a mystery that defies logic. While the Eleusinian Mysteries shrouded themselves in solemn secrecy, ancient Rome hosted a springtime ritual so chaotic it turned society upside down. The Hilaria festival wasn't just a celebration, it was an explosion of madness sanctioned by the state, where slaves insulted their masters, men paraded in women's clothing, and mock kings ruled for a day before being dethroned in raucous public spectacles. This wasn't simple revelry, it was a calculated unraveling of order, tied to the worship of Cybele, the great mother goddess whose cult pulsed with primal energy. Her priests, the Galli, were infamous for their ecstatic rites, slashing their own flesh in frenzied dances while crowds roared approval. The festival's climax saw devotees working themselves into such a state that they'd castrate themselves in public, offering their blood to the earth in a grotesque fertility ritual. Roman historians wrote of the streets running red, of men collapsing in trances, convinced Cybele herself had possessed them. Yet the most unsettling part wasn't the violence, it was the psychological power of these reversals. For 24 hours, strict class hierarchies dissolved. Senators endured jokes from beggars, and masters served meals to their slaves. Scholars believe this wasn't mere entertainment, but a pressure valve for Rome's rigid society, a way to channel rebellion into controlled chaos. But sometimes the chaos spilled over. Records tell of years when the mockery turned real, when the galleys' whips struck too deep, and the festival's temporary madness sparked riots that took days to quell. What fascinates modern researchers is how Rome tolerated, even required, this annual descent into anarchy. The Hilaria wasn't some fringe event, it was state-sponsored, with emperors attending and temples bankrolling the spectacle. Perhaps they understood something we've forgotten, that civilization needs its shadows, that order thrives when we occasionally let the wildness out before carefully locking it away again. The ruins of Cybele's temples still stand across the Mediterranean, silent witnesses to the days when Rome danced on the knife's edge between control and chaos. High above the Valley of Mexico, on a sacred hilltop where the stars seemed close enough to touch, Aztec priests prepared for a night of terror that would determine the fate of civilization itself. Every 52 years, when the sacred calendar completed its full cycle, darkness fell not just on the land, but on the collective psyche of an empire. This was the New Fire Ceremony, a ritual so high stakes that its failure would mean the sun might never rise again. The Aztecs believed time was fragile, that the universe operated on borrowed energy requiring regular renewal. Astronomical precision governed the ceremony. Priests tracked the Pleiades constellation, waiting for it to reach zenith. If the star cluster continued moving across the sky, it signaled the world would endure another cycle. But first, fire had to be reborn in human flesh. In the days leading up to the event, chaos engulfed the empire. Families extinguished every hearth, smashed cooking pots, and huddled in silence as if the world had already ended. At midnight, atop the Hill of the Star, a chosen victim, often a captured warrior, was stretched across a sacrificial stone. As thousands watched from the valley below, a priest plunged an obsidian blade into the man's chest, ripping out his still-beating heart. Then came the critical moment. Using wooden sticks, they attempted to spark a new flame in the gaping wound. Success meant light, warmth, and continued existence. Failure ushered in an eternity of demonic darkness where Tzitzimitl, the skeletal star demons, would descend to devour humanity. Archaeologists have found evidence of mass sacrifices coinciding with these cycles, entire plazas filled with skulls from victims offered as fuel for the new era. But the most chilling detail isn't the violence, it's the psychological mastery behind the ritual. By linking cosmic order to human action, the Aztec state ensured absolute obedience. When the fire finally blazed atop the temple, runners carried torches to every city, village, and home, rekindling civilization one flame at a time. Yet beneath the pageantry lay a terrifying truth. An entire culture lived in perpetual dread of celestial collapse, willing to tear out hearts in the desperate hope of keeping the stars in motion. The chilling scream of a defeated warrior echoes across a frozen Nordic battlefield as Viking berserkers drag their captive toward a sacred oak. This wasn't just another execution, it was the Blood Eagle, a ritual so horrific that even seasoned historians shudder at its description. According to Norse sagas, this gruesome act wasn't mere punishment. It was a sacred offering to Odin himself, the All-Father who hung from the World Tree for 9 nights to gain wisdom. The victim's ribs were splayed like wings, his lungs pulled through the wounds to flutter against his back like a bird in flight, a living, breathing sacrifice to the gods. But how much of this legend is rooted in reality? The sagas describe the Blood Eagle in stomach-turning detail. The victim was first pinned face down, their spine carved open with a ceremonial axe. Salt was rubbed into the wounds to prevent unconsciousness as the ribs were severed from the backbone and pulled outward. Some accounts claim priests would then reach into the chest cavity to rearrange the lungs, creating that ghastly, winged effect while the victim still drew breath. The symbolism was unmistakable. Eagles, Odin's sacred messengers, would carry the dying man's spirit straight to Valhalla. Archaeological evidence paints a murkier picture. A 9th century mass grave in England revealed a skeleton with telltale cut marks along the ribs, matching the saga's descriptions. Yet many scholars argue the Blood Eagle was less historical practice and more poetic metaphor, a Viking horror story to terrify enemies. The Norse were master propagandists, and tales of their brutality often outstripped reality. But even as legend, the Blood Eagle's power endures. It wasn't just about pain. It transformed the victim into a vessel between worlds, their agony mirroring Odin's own sacrifice for knowledge. What unsettles modern researchers most isn't the violence, it's the ritual's eerie precision. Every cut held meaning, every scream a prayer. Whether fact or folklore, the Blood Eagle reveals the Norse worldview. Death wasn't an end, but a doorway. And sometimes that doorway required wings of flesh and bone. In the sweltering summer of 1518, the streets of Strasbourg erupted not with celebration, but with something far darker. A woman named Frau Trophia stepped into the square and began to dance. Not the measured steps of a festive performance, but a jerking, relentless motion she couldn't stop. Within days, dozens joined her, their bodies convulsing to an invisible rhythm. Within weeks, the number swelled to nearly 400, their feet pounding the cobblestones until their shoes split open, their muscles tore, and some collapsed dead from exhaustion. This was the dancing plague, a real-life nightmare where people danced themselves to death, seemingly possessed by forces no one could explain. At first, authorities blamed overheated blood or moral weakness, prescribing more dancing as the cure. Musicians were hired, and wooden platforms erected to contain the frenzy. But the strategy backfired catastrophically. The afflicted didn't need encouragement. They were trapped in a waking nightmare, screaming for help even as their limbs flailed uncontrollably. Contemporary accounts describe faces twisted in agony, bones shattering from the constant motion, and bystanders desperately holding dancers down only to watch them break free, compelled by something beyond their will. Modern scientists still grapple with explanations. One leading theory points to ergot poisoning, the same fungus implicated in the Eleusinian Mysteries, which can cause hallucinations and muscle spasms. Others argue for mass psychogenic illness, a form of collective hysteria where extreme stress manifests as physical symptoms. Strasbourg had been ravaged by famine and disease, and the psychological toll may have erupted in this bizarre physical outburst. But the most haunting detail comes from the victims themselves. Many described an overwhelming terror, as if their bodies had been hijacked by some external force. The clergy saw it as divine wrath, a punishment for sin that required desperate measures. Some dancers were carted to nearby shrines where priests performed exorcisms over their trembling forms. A few reported temporary relief after touching relics or praying at sacred sites, fueling belief in supernatural causes. Yet what truly unsettles us today isn't just the mystery, it's the realization that the human mind and body can rebel in ways that defy reason. The dancing plague wasn't merely a historical oddity. It was a horrifying glimpse into how easily reality can unravel when fear, biology, and belief collide. The cobblestones of Strasbourg have long since quieted, but the question lingers. If this could happen then, what unseen forces might still lurk within us, waiting for the right moment to dance? In the torchlit depths of an Egyptian tomb, a priest raises a fork, adds its blade shaped like the hind leg of a bull toward the linen-wrapped face of a mummy. With a ceremonial touch to the lips, he performs the opening of the mouth, a ritual so vital that without it, the deceased would starve in the afterlife, their soul trapped in a silent, senseless prison. This wasn't just symbolic theater. The ancient Egyptians believed this act literally restored the mummy's ability to breathe, eat, and speak in the realm of the dead. The tools used were as precise as they were peculiar. Alongside the adze, priests wielded a serpent-headed wand to open the senses, a curved blade to mimic the hook used by Horus to resurrect his father Osiris, and a ceremonial chisel to symbolically break the seal between life and death. Each instrument had to be touched to the mummy's mouth in exact sequence, accompanied by spells from the Book of the Dead. One incantation commanded, "May your mouth be opened by Ptah with his chisel of electrum," invoking the god who crafted the universe with words alone. But the ritual's true power lay in its mirroring of the Osiris myth. Just as the god's dismembered body was reassembled and revived by Isis and Anubis, the mummy became an Osiris reborn through these rites. Priests even reenacted the god's grief, wailing and tearing their clothes to channel the divine energy of resurrection. Modern CT scans reveal something eerie. Many mummies show fractures around the mouth, suggesting the ceremonial touches sometimes involved actual force, proof of how desperately the living believed in this gateway to eternity. What unsettles archaeologists isn't just the ritual's brutality, but its staggering longevity. For over 3,000 years, generation after generation performed these same motions with flawless precision, convinced that a single misstep could doom a soul to oblivion. The tools still exist today, polished by countless hands, their edges worn from touching the lips of the dead. They whisper of a civilization so certain of life after death that they spent centuries perfecting the art of unlocking it. Beneath the modern streets of Tunis, where tourists now stroll past cafes and souvenir shops, lies a field of tiny urns that still chills archaeologists to their core. The Tophet of Carthage, a sacred precinct dedicated to Baal Hammon and his consort Tanit, holds the remains of thousands of children, some just weeks old. Ancient writers like Diodorus Siculus claimed Carthaginian nobles burned their firstborn sons alive during crises, their screams drowned out by flutes and drums to mask the horror from the gods. But is this the full story, or one of history's most enduring smears? The archaeology tells a complex tale. Excavations reveal layers of small bones, many showing signs of cremation, nestled in urns beneath carved stelae inscribed with a haunting phrase, "To the Lady Tanit, face of Baal." Some slabs depict a priest holding a child, while others show the crescent moon, symbol of Tanit, hovering above an altar. Yet key details defy the Roman narratives. Many urns contain fetal remains or infants who likely died of natural causes, suggesting the Tophet may have been a resting place for children lost too soon, not just ritual victims. Chemical analysis adds another twist. Soil samples show elevated mercury and charcoal concentrations, hinting at ceremonial fires, but no mass burn pits matching descriptions of wholesale sacrifice. Scholars remain sharply divided. One faction points to Carthage's enemies, particularly Rome, who had every reason to paint their rivals as barbaric. After all, the Romans themselves practiced human sacrifice in early times, drowning defective infants in the Tiber. Another group cites Punic texts mentioning molk offerings, a term some interpret as child sacrifice, though others argue it referred to animal substitutes. The most chilling evidence comes from Carthage's darkest hour. During the city's final siege in 146 BC, the tombs of noble families were found to contain the skeletons of children, possibly killed in desperation to appease the gods. Perhaps the truth lies between propaganda and piety. Carthage's culture revered rebirth, the phoenix-like cycle of death and renewal symbolized by Tanit, who governed both fertility and the underworld. In this light, the Tophet might represent a terrible bargain, the return of life through the offering of life. Modern DNA studies add painful nuance. Some infants shared genetic ties with adults buried nearby, implying familial bonds. Whether these were acts of devotion, desperation, or something else entirely, the silent stelae keep their secrets. What emerges is not a simple tale of barbarism, but a civilization wrestling with the same unanswerable questions that haunt us all. How far would we go to protect what we love, and what gods demand in return? The thunderous sound of a rubber ball echoes through the jungle as two teams clash in the shadow of a pyramid. This wasn't just a game, it was the Maya ballgame, a brutal sport where players used their hips to hurl a solid rubber ball through stone hoops, and where defeat often meant losing more than just points. For the Maya, this court wasn't a playground, it was a liminal space between worlds, a battleground where the stakes were life and death. The rules varied across city-states, but one chilling constant remained. The captain of the losing team sometimes knelt at center court as his head was struck clean off, an offering to the gods that mirrored their most sacred myth. The Popol Vuh, the Maya's epic creation story, tells of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who outwitted the lords of the underworld in a series of bowl games. Their victory resurrected their father, the maize god, and established the cycle of life and death. But the twins' journey began with tragedy. Their own father and uncle had been defeated in the underworld's ball court, decapitated and hung as a warning above the playing field. Every real-life match reenacted this myth, with the ball symbolizing the son's perilous journey through the underworld each night, and the captain's sacrifice echoing the twins' triumph over darkness. Archaeologists have uncovered grisly evidence of this ritual's reality. At El Tajín in Mexico, carvings show players holding severed heads, while the Great Ball Court of Chichen Itza has panels depicting skulls sprouting vines, a direct reference to the maize god's resurrection. Some courts even feature acoustical quirks. A whisper at one end can be heard clearly at the other, possibly mimicking the voices of spirits. The most chilling discovery came at Capon, where a losing captain's skeleton was found buried beneath the playing surface, his skull replaced by a rubber ball. But these sacrifices weren't just about mythology, they were geopolitical theater. Wars between city-states sometimes culminated in ritual games where captured nobles played for their lives. Victorious kings would don the flayed skin of sacrificed opponents, transforming into the maize god himself during coronation ceremonies. The ball game was chess, gladiatorial combat, and religious ritual rolled into one, a spectacle that reinforced power hierarchies while offering a macabre form of conflict resolution. Modern athletes play for trophies. The Maya played for the very order of the cosmos, where every bounce of the rubber ball echoed the heartbeat of the gods. What unsettles researchers today isn't just the violence, but the game's psychological depth. The ball court's eye shape mirrored the Maya cosmos, the long alley representing the Milky Way, the end zones marking portals to the underworld. Players wore padded belts resembling giant centipedes, creatures associated with the subterranean realm, while the ball's movement mimicked celestial bodies. Even the decapitation held layered meaning. The head was seen as a seed, its planting ensuring cosmic renewal. this wasn't mindless brutality. It was a meticulously choreographed drama where every drop of blood nourished the balance of the universe. The silence of these stone courts today belies the roaring crowds and chanting priests who once believed the fate of the world hinged on a game. At 18,000 feet in the Himalayas, where the air is thin enough to make every breath a struggle, a Tibetan monk raises a ceremonial dagger above a lifeless body. This isn't an act of violence, it's one of the most sacred rituals on earth. The sky burial, known as Jeta, transforms death into an offering where human remains become sustenance for vultures in a final act of radical generosity. To Western eyes accustomed to caskets and cremation, the practice seems shocking, even grotesque. But for Tibetan Buddhists, it's the purest expression of compassion, a sacred bridge between life and death that nourishes the cycle of existence. The ritual begins with meticulous preparation. Lamas chant sacred texts for days, guiding the deceased's consciousness through the bardo, the transitional state between death and rebirth. Then the Rojyapas, or body breakers, take over. Using axes and knives, they dismember the corpse with practiced precision, separating flesh from bone. Marrow is mixed with barley flour to create tsampa, a ritual food for the birds. Every cut follows ancient protocols, ensuring no part goes to waste. As the first vultures descend, sometimes hundreds at once, the Rojyapas beat drums and blow thigh-bone trumpets to guide their feast. Within hours, only bones remain, which are then crushed and mixed with more tsampa for a second feeding. By sunset, nothing is left but a few scattered fragments carried away on the high mountain winds. This practice isn't just pragmatic, it's deeply philosophical. Tibetan Buddhism teaches that the body is merely a vessel, worthless after consciousness departs. Giving it to vultures, considered Dakinis, celestial beings, prevents attachment to physical form while practicing Dana Paramita, the perfection of giving. The harsh Himalayan terrain, where wood is too scarce for cremation and the ground too rocky for burial, made sky burials an ecological necessity. But over centuries, necessity became sacrament. Unlike Western funerals that preserve bodies in coffins or urns, this ritual embraces impermanence, a stark reminder that all things return to the elements. Modern science reveals another layer of brilliance in this ancient custom. Vultures possess stomach acid strong enough to neutralize pathogens like anthrax and cholera, making sky burials one of the most hygienic disposal methods known. Compare this to conventional burials where embalming fluids leach carcinogens into groundwater, or cremation, which releases carbon dioxide and mercury vapor. The sky burial leaves no trace, requiring no land, no chemicals, no energy, just the natural order of scavengers and decay. Yet for all its logic, the ritual faces growing threats. China's occupation of Tibet has led to restrictions, with authorities bulldozing sacred burial sites and imposing cremation. Conservation adds another complication. Vulture populations across Asia have plummeted by 99% due to livestock drugs like diclofenac, leaving some monasteries to keep captive flocks for rituals. The very birds central to this practice are vanishing, a tragic irony for a tradition built on harmony with nature. What unsettles outsiders isn't the physical dismantling of the body, but the world view it represents, a culture so detached from materialism that even in death, one's flesh becomes a gift rather than a relic. In a world obsessed with preserving memory through monuments and headstones, the sky burial whispers a humbling truth that the greatest legacy isn't what we leave behind, but what we let go. Rome in 1860 BC wasn't just a city, it was a tinderbox of paranoia where whispers of secret midnight gatherings slithered through the Senate like poison. The Bacchanalia, once a modest Greek festival honoring Dionysus, had metastasized into something far darker on Italian soil. By night, initiates men and women, free and enslaved, poured through vineyards outside the city, disappearing into torch-lit groves where wine flowed as recklessly as the rumors. They spoke of rituals that inverted the natural order, noble women coupling with slaves, magistrates drinking blood, and sacred vessels filled not with wine, but with deadly toxins to silence the uninitiated. When the Senate finally infiltrated these rites, what they uncovered sparked the first state-sponsored witch hunt in Western history. The crackdown was swift and brutal. A consul named Postumius stood before the Senate, reading a breathless account from an informant. They scream prophecies in frenzied trances, claiming the gods speak through them. Men wail like women, citizens bow to foreign cult leaders, and worst of all, his voice dropped. They plot to burn Rome itself. Whether any of this was true hardly mattered. The Bacchanalia's real crime wasn't debauchery, it was eroding the rigid hierarchies that kept Rome stable. Slaves knew their masters' secrets, women wielded influence beyond the household, and entire families pledged loyalty not to the state but to the cult's charismatic priests. Surviving Senate decrees revealed the panic etched into law. Over 7,000 adherents were arrested. Those who refused to renounce the cult faced public execution. Women, usually exempt from capital punishment, were handed over to their families for private killings, a chilling loophole to avoid scandal. The Senate even banned gatherings of more than 3 worshippers without state approval, a restriction that lingered for centuries. But the most revealing detail, authorities preserved Dionysus' public temples while crushing his secret rites. Rome understood the danger wasn't the god but the loss of control. Modern historians sift through the hysteria for kernels of truth. Some Bacchanalian accusations like poisoned drinks mirror ancient Greek rites where psychoactive herbs were mixed with wine to induce visions. The orgies may have involved ritualized ecstatic dancing, misinterpreted by conservative Romans as sexual anarchy. Even the alleged conspiracy to burn Rome could trace back to Dionysian symbolism. The god's followers carried torches to represent spiritual awakening, not arson. What terrified Rome wasn't the rituals themselves, but their power to unite people across class lines in shared transcendence, a threat far more dangerous than any drunken revel. The Bacchanalia scandal's legacy echoes in unexpected places. It birthed Europe's first recorded moral panic, setting a template for persecuting minority religions from early Christians to medieval heretics. Yet fragments of the forbidden rites survived underground, resurfacing in carnival traditions where masks and madness briefly overturned social order. Rome proved one immutable truth: try as authorities might to suppress them, rituals of ecstasy always find a way to dance in the shadows. For 4 months each year, the Hawaiian Islands underwent a transformation so profound that even warriors laid down their weapons, and kings willingly became temporary outcasts. The Makahiki season wasn't just a festival, it was a total societal reset, a sacred interlude where violence ceased. Taxes were collected in the form of offerings, and the god Lono's effigy traveled the islands, blessing the land for the coming year. But the most astonishing spectacle came in the final days, when chiefs stripped naked and hurled themselves down mud-slicked hillsides in a ritual race that determined everything from crop distribution to political power. At the heart of Makahiki lay a radical concept, Kapululu, the time of peace. From October through February, all warfare halted under penalty of death. Fishing nets were hung up, and even arguments were settled through sanctioned games rather than violence. This wasn't mere celebration, it mirrored the agricultural cycle, coinciding with the rainy season when the land needed rest. Lono, the god of fertility and rainfall, was believed to return annually on a celestial canoe, his arrival marked by the rising of the Pleiades. His effigy, a crossbeam hung with white copper cloth and feathered symbols, was carried clockwise around each island in a precise ritual circuit, collecting tributes of pigs, taro, and barkcloth. Then came the games, where social norms inverted with wild abandon. Chiefs who spent the year adorned in feathered cloaks now competed bare-skinned in contests designed to humble them before the gods. The Holua Slide, a 200-foot-long track of packed earth greased with mud, saw rulers' belly flopping onto narrow sleds, careening downhill at lethal speeds. Archaeologists have found Holua courses with stone revetments that amplified the danger, suggesting crashes were frequent and spectacular. Other events tested skills that seemed deliberately absurd. Spear throwing at coconuts balanced on poles, wrestling matches where opponents were smeared with kukui nut oil, and foot races where runners carried heavy stones. The most politically charged ritual was the symbolic death of the king. As Lono's effigy completed its circuit, the ruling alley underwent a ceremonial surrender, disappearing into seclusion while priests chanted the Cumulipo, the Hawaiian creation chant. This wasn't mere theater. It reinforced that even the highest authority was subject to cosmic cycles. If the king resisted or if drought followed Makahiki, it signaled divine displeasure, often sparking rebellions. Modern scholars see Makahiki as a masterclass in social engineering. By forcing chiefs to compete as equals in ludicrous games, it diffused tensions that could otherwise erupt in war. The tribute system redistributed wealth, while the king's temporary abdication prevented tyranny. Even the Holua races had ecological purpose. The muddy slides churned nutrient-rich soil for planting season. What Europeans dismissed as pagan revelry was in fact a sophisticated mechanism for maintaining balance between nature, gods, and humanity. The echoes of Makahiki survive today in Hawaii's Aloha festivals, where the spirit of Lono still whispers a radical idea. Sometimes the strongest act of leadership is knowing when to slide downhill naked and laugh. In the dense forests of Siberia and Japan's northern islands, the Ainu people practiced a ritual so emotionally charged that even seasoned anthropologists hesitate to call it a sacrifice. The Bear Festival, or Ayamonte, revolved around an animal raised from cubhood as a family member, fed, sung to, even nursed at women's breasts, only to be ritually killed in a ceremony that blurred the lines between mourning and celebration. This wasn't cruelty, it was an act of profound reverence where the bear served as a living bridge between humans and the spirit world. The ritual began with hunters capturing a bear cub, often after killing its mother. But what followed defied modern expectations. The cub was raised in the village as a beloved guest, treated with ceremonial respect. Women nursed it alongside their own children. Men offered it the first taste of every meal, and elders addressed it as kamai, a word reserved for gods. For 2 years, the bear lived this sacred life, its every growl and movement interpreted as divine messages. Then, when the time came, the village prepared for a farewell that would wrench any heart. On the appointed day, the bear was led to a specially crafted platform adorned with Ino sacred wooden shavings that served as prayer offerings. Archers took positions, but not before villagers showered the bear with gifts, sake, rice cakes, even hand-carved jewelry. As the arrows flew, they chanted prayers, begging the bear's spirit to carry their gratitude to the mountain god Kim Unkamai. The moment of death was met not with cheers, but with wailing grief. Women sobbed openly, men sliced their foreheads in mourning. Every part of the bear was utilized, meat shared in a communal feast, fur crafted into ritual garments, skull placed on an altar as a permanent dwelling for its spirit. Modern critics often fixate on the killing, but scholars emphasize the ritual's complexity. The Ainu saw no contradiction in loving the bear while ending its life. To them, this was the highest honor. The bear wasn't prey, it was a divine envoy returning home laden with human prayers. Ethnographer Bronislaw Malinowski recorded elders explaining, "We weep because the god misses his mountain. We feast because he gifts us his body." Even the method of killing held meaning. Arrows allowed the bear's blood to soak into the earth, fertilizing the land it once roamed. Today, the festival persists in altered forms. Some Ainu communities use symbolic effigies or substitute bears with ceremonial foods, bowing to legal restrictions and shifting attitudes. Yet the core belief endures that true respect sometimes requires sacrifice, and that the beings we cherish most may serve a purpose beyond our understanding. What lingers isn't the shock of the ritual's climax, but its heartbreaking tenderness, a people weeping as they send their god home, trusting that love and loss are two sides of the same sacred bond. Julius Caesar's chilling account reads like something from a nightmare, a towering effigy woven from willow branches, its hollow belly packed with living, breathing victims. As flames licked at the structure, the screams of those trapped inside mingled with the chanting of druids below, their hands raised toward the sky. This was the Wicker Man, a ritual so horrifying that even Rome, no stranger to public executions, recoiled at its barbarity. But how much of Caesar's description was fact, and how much was propaganda designed to justify his conquest of Gaul? The answer lies somewhere between fire and folklore. Caesar's Commentarii de Bello Gallico provides the sole detailed description of the Wicker Man, claiming druids used it for mass sacrifices to ensure fertile crops and military victories. The effigy's shape, sometimes humanoid, sometimes animal, allegedly represented a god who demanded offerings of criminals, prisoners of war, or even volunteers seeking divine favor. Yet historians raise valid suspicions. Caesar wrote to glorify his campaigns, and painting the Celts as savages served his political agenda. No archaeological evidence of a Wicker Man has ever been found, though cremation was common in Celtic burials, leaving little trace of sacrificial victims. Digging deeper reveals tantalizing clues. At a bog in Lindow, England, the well-preserved body of Lindow Man was discovered with his last meal of charred bread still in his stomach, a possible link to sacrificial rites. Other bog bodies show signs of ritualistic triple deaths, strangulation, bludgeoning, and throat cutting, eerily mirroring Celtic triadic symbolism. Could these victims have been offerings to gods like Ceremonies, the thunder deity associated with fire sacrifices? The timing also suggests agricultural motives. Many bog bodies date to spring or harvest seasons, when the Wicker Man's flames might have symbolically transferred life force from humans to crops. Modern pagans and scholars offer alternative interpretations. Some argue the Wicker Man was purely symbolic, filled with livestock or grain rather than people. Others note that Caesar's description resembles Eurasian harvest effigies like the Slavic Kostroma, a straw figure drowned or burned to ensure fertility. Even the name wicker might be a mistranslation. Celtic baskets used flexible wood, but giant combustible structures seem impractical. Perhaps the truth lies in psychological warfare. The mere legend of the Wicker Man could have terrified enemies into submission without a single flame being lit. What lingers isn't just the horror, but the ritual's layered symbolism. Fire purified as it destroyed, wicker bent but didn't break, and sacrifice real or metaphorical threaded through countless ancient cultures. Whether fact or Roman fabrication, the Wicker Man endures as a dark mirror to our own fears, of fanaticism, of the unknown, and of what people might justify in the name of faith. The Druids left no written records, only the echo of Caesar's words and the silent testimony of bogs that keep their secrets close. Every spring in Kawasaki, Japan, the streets erupt in a riot of pink, glitter, and towering wooden phalluses carried aloft by laughing crowds. The Kanemaru Matsuri, literally the festival of the steel phallus, might seem like a raucous party, but its roots stretch back to a legend so bizarre it would make even modern mythologists blush. Centuries ago, a sharp-toothed demon supposedly hid inside a young woman's vagina, castrating two suitors who tried to wed her until a blacksmith forged an iron phallus to break the demon's teeth. Today, that tale transforms into a celebration where priests bless giant penis statues, couples pray for fertility, and LGBTQ+ communities rally under the banner of a once taboo symbol. The festival's centerpiece is the Shinto shrine's mikoshi, a portable shrine traditionally used to parade deities reimagined as a 3-meter-long pink penis adorned with ribbons and carried by cross-dressing priests. Vendors sell penis-shaped lollipops, candles, and even vegetable carvings, while revelers don costumes ranging from sperm-shaped hats to full-body latex suits. Yet beneath the carnival atmosphere lies serious spiritual intent. Couples struggling with infertility leave Ima plaques with prayers for children, and newlyweds lick ceremonial penis candy for luck, acts that would seem shocking elsewhere but here are treated with reverence. What makes Kanemaru Matsuri remarkable isn't just its unapologetic celebration of sexuality, but how it's evolved. Originally a niche event for sex workers praying for protection from STDs, it's now a global phenomenon embracing gender diversity. Drag queens lead parades alongside conservative grandmothers, and corporate sponsors like Durex fund events promoting safe sex education. The festival's mascot, a cheerful pink phallus named Kanemaru-kun, has become an unlikely LGBTQ+ icon in a country still debating same-sex marriage. Archaeologists trace similar phallic worship across Japan's history, from Jomon period stone rods to Edo-era night parades, where phalluses were paraded to ensure bountiful harvests. But Kanemaru Matsuri stands apart by transforming ancient anxiety. The vagina demon legend reflects fears of female sexuality into modern empowerment. The demon's defeat symbolizes overcoming stigma, whether around infertility, HIV, or gender identity. As one priest explained while blessing a drag queen with a wooden phallus wand, the gods care about sincerity, not form. In a world where discussions of sexuality often breed division, this festival offers a radical alternative: laughter as liturgy, irreverence as prayer, and a giant glittering penis as a sacred bridge between tradition and progress. The streets may be packed with Instagrammers now, but the old magic lingers: every lick of that ridiculous candy, every cheer for the wobbling Mikoshi, echoes the blacksmith's hammer striking steel, forging not just a tool to defeat demons, but a symbol that pleasure and piety can coexist. In the hushed temple precinct of ancient York, beneath lapis lazuli-studded archways that glimmered like the night sky, a king knelt before a priestess draped in the 7 sacred garments of Inanna, goddess of love, war, and the pulsating life force of Mesopotamia. This was the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage, a ritual so potent it blurred the line between mortal and divine. For one night, the ruler became Dumuzi, the shepherd consort of the gods, while the high priestess channeled Inanna herself. Their union wasn't just symbolic, it was believed to literally fertilize the land, ensuring bountiful harvests and military victories for the coming year. But what actually transpired behind those cedarwood doors remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. Cuneiform tablets describe the ceremony in tantalizing fragments. The priestess would recite the erotic hymns of Inanna Dumuzi, verses so explicit they shocked early archaeologists. My vulva, the horn, the boat of heaven, is full of eagerness like the young moon. The king responded with his own litany of praises before the couple disappeared into the Jiparu, the temple's innermost chamber. Some texts mention the sharing of honey and wine, others the laying down of the royal lap, a phrase scholars hotly debate. Was this sacred intercourse a ritualized pantomime or something else entirely? The economic records of provide cryptic clues. Temple archives list extravagant payments to priestesses after the ceremony, including parcels of land and lapis jewelry. One tablet from Lagash details a post-ritual feast where the bed of Inanna was displayed strewn with ceremonial linens, some stained in ways that suggest more than theatrical performance. Yet skeptics point to Mesopotamian medical texts describing priestesses who ingested herbs to simulate virginity, hinting at possible staged symbolism. The truth may lie in between. Like the Egyptian opening of the mouth, this ritual likely operated on multiple levels: physical act, divine metaphor, and political theater all woven together. Beyond Mesopotamia, echoes of sacred marriages reverberate across cultures. In Japan, the Deijusai ceremony symbolically wedded emperors to the sun goddess Amaterasu through a nighttime rice offering. Hindu scriptures describe the Rajasuya rite, where kings ceremonially married the earth goddess Prithvi. Even the biblical Song of Songs borrows imagery from Mesopotamian love poetry, reframed as allegory. What unites these traditions is the staggering responsibility placed on rulers, their very bodies becoming conduits between heaven and earth. A failed harvest or lost war could be blamed on the king's inability to please the goddess, a precarious balance of power masked as divine favor. The most fascinating parallel comes from Nepal's living tradition of the Kumari, a prepubescent girl worshipped as the human incarnation of the goddess Teoju. Unlike Mesopotamia's adult priestesses, the Kumari remains celibate, yet her annual ritual interaction with the king, where she stamps his forehead with vermilion, serves a similar function, legitimizing his rule through divine feminine approval. This suggests the sacred marriage core wasn't sexuality, but the alchemical moment when mortal authority touches the untamable power of the goddess. Modern excavations at Yorak reveal a telling architectural detail. The Japaru's floor was paved with bricks, each inscribed with the names of the ruling king and high priestess, physically embedding their union into the temple's foundations. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of the Hieros Gomos, not whether literal intercourse occurred, but how entire civilizations once staked their survival on rituals that acknowledged humanity's fragile dependence on forces beyond control. When the last priestess of Inanna vanished into history, she took with her the secrets of that sacred night, leaving us only with poetry that still makes the barley tremble. In the frozen expanse of the Arctic, where survival hangs by the thin thread of a hunter's skill, the Inupiat people practiced a ritual so delicate it blurred the line between gratitude and necessity. The Bladder Festival, or Nakasuk, wasn't just a ceremony, it was a covenant with the sea itself, a plea for renewal disguised as an act of reverence. After months of hunting seals, the community gathered to honor the spirits of those animals whose lives had sustained them. But the focus wasn't on the meat or fur, it was on the bladders, those fragile sacs believed to hold the very essence of the seal's soul. The ritual unfolded with meticulous care. Hunters carefully removed the bladders from each harvested seal, inflating them like tiny translucent balloons. Women prepared elaborate feasts of seal meat, while children crafted small ceremonial boats from driftwood. Then came the moment of return. The bladders were placed in the boats and carried out to cracks in the ice, where they were lowered back into the ocean's dark embrace. This wasn't symbolic recycling. The Inupiat believed the bladders would find their way to Sedna, the sea goddess, who would reclothe them in flesh and send the seals back to the living world. Archaeological evidence from ancient Thule sites reveals how deeply this practice was woven into survival. Excavated tools include specialized bone needles for bladder extraction, their edges polished smooth from generations of use. Even the festival's timing was precise, held during the winter solstice when the sun's return mirrored the hoped-for rebirth of game. But the most striking detail comes from oral histories. Hunters would whisper apologies to the bladders as they released them, acknowledging the paradox of taking life to sustain life. Modern biologists offer an uncanny parallel. Seal populations follow natural cycles of abundance and scarcity, and the festival's timing often aligned with seasonal migrations. By temporarily halting hunts during the ritual, communities may have unknowingly allowed seal stocks to replenish, a form of ecological management disguised as spirituality. The bladders, buoyant and biodegradable, left no trace, but the practice sustained both culture and ecology for centuries. Today, as Arctic ice retreats and hunting traditions fade, the bladder festival survives in fragments. Some communities now use symbolic balloons or carved substitutes, adapting to conservation laws and shifting beliefs. Yet the core idea endures, that every act of taking demands an act of giving back, that survival is not entitlement but negotiation. The Inupiat understood what modern societies often forget, that respect for the hunted is not just ethics but the deepest pragmatism. When those tiny bladder boats vanished beneath the ice, they carried more than souls. They carried a promise that the sea would never be emptied. Deep in the shadows of India's colonial-era highways, where dust swirled around passing caravans like ghostly fingers, the Thuggee cult supposedly practiced a form of worship that turned travel into terror. These weren't ordinary bandits, they were devotees of Kali, the Hindu goddess of destruction, who they believed demanded human sacrifices in exchange for her favor. Their weapon of choice, a deceptively simple yellow silk scarf called a rumal, weighted with coins at one end to become a lethal garrote. With practiced efficiency, a thug would slip the noose around an unsuspecting victim's neck, tightening it before they could scream. Death came swiftly, often disguised as robbery, the bodies buried in concealed graves to avoid detection. But separating truth from colonial hysteria reveals a far more complex story. British administrators in the 1800s inflated Thuggee into a vast, organized conspiracy, claiming tens of thousands of ritual murders. Records like the Confessions of a Thug, supposedly dictated by a captured member named Seed Amer Oli, read like sensationalized pulp fiction, complete with coded hand signals and secret initiation rites. Modern historians note striking inconsistencies. Many confessions were extracted under torture, and the estimated death tolls defy logic. Some British sources allege the cult killed 1 million travelers over 6 centuries, a statistic impossible to verify. What's undeniable is the Thuggee's roots in a darker spiritual tradition. Kali's worship sometimes involved blood offerings, and her more esoteric followers believed destruction paved the way for creation. Some Thuggee rituals allegedly included chanting mantras over their rumals, treating them as sacred objects rather than mere tools. The killings followed a strict code. Women, musicians, and certain castes were spared, while wealthy merchants became prime targets. This selectivity suggests robbery masked as religion, or perhaps religion justifying robbery. Archaeology complicates the narrative further. While mass graves have been found along trade routes, forensic evidence often points to generic banditry rather than ritual murder. Kali temples unearthed near these sites show no overt signs of human sacrifice, unlike the skull-adorned shrines of a more extreme tantric sects. The most plausible theory. Thuggee began as scattered highway gangs who adopted Kali's iconography to intimidate victims, then became mythologized by the British to justify harsh crackdowns on indigenous resistance. Yet the cult's legacy endures in chilling ways. The word thug entered global vocabulary, and their rumal technique influenced strangulation methods in espionage. Kali worship, meanwhile, evolved beyond these shadows. Modern devotees honor her as a protector, her necklace of skulls reinterpreted as the cycles of life and death. The Thuggee may have been more legend than liturgy, but their story whispers an unsettling truth: how easily faith can be twisted to serve the darkest human impulses, and how power thrives on the stories we choose to believe. In the quiet villages of China's Shaanxi province, where red lanterns sway over narrow alleyways, a different kind of wedding procession sometimes wins its way to the graveyard. Here, the bride wears no gown, the groom speaks no vows because both have been dead for years. This is Minghan, the ghost marriage, a tradition stretching back to the Shang dynasty, where the living arrange unions for the unmarried deceased to ensure their spirits don't wander the afterlife alone. But what begins as an act of love often spirals into something far darker, as desperate families turn to grave robbers and even murderers to secure a corpse bride for their sons. The ritual itself is steeped in haunting symbolism. 2 skeletons, or sometimes cremated ashes, are dressed in traditional wedding attire and placed side by side in a joint tomb. Paper effigies of houses, cars, and money are burned to furnish their afterlife, while living relatives bow before the graves as if at a real ceremony. Ancient texts like the Book of Rites mention ghost marriages as early as 1700 BCE, originally intended to maintain familial harmony. An unmarried ancestor, it was believed, could become a gihan, a restless spirit bringing misfortune to their bloodline. By tying these lost souls in matrimony, the living hoped to appease them, ensuring their protection rather than their wrath. Yet modern cases reveal a macabre underbelly. In 2016, police in Handon cracked open a trafficking ring that had stolen at least 12 female corpses, selling them for up to $40,000 each to families desperate to perform ghost marriages. The demand was especially high for young women who died unmarried, their bodies exhumed, smuggled, and even stored by grave robbers in freezers until a buyer emerged. One notorious robber, surnamed Song, admitted to scouring obituaries for women under 40, then hiring accomplices to dig them up under cover of night. The psychology behind this black market speaks to something deeper than superstition. China's one-child policy and gender imbalance left millions of men without brides, and that anxiety spills into the afterlife. Parents fear their sons will be lonely in death as they were in life, or worse, that their unfulfilled spirits will curse the family. Some even believe a ghost marriage can retroactively legitimize relationships. If a living man had an affair with a married woman, her ghost might be wed to him posthumously to avoid supernatural retaliation. Archaeologists find eerie precedents. Neolithic graves contain paired skeletons buried with wedding artifacts, suggesting the practice dates back millennia. During the Tang dynasty, aristocratic families staged lavish ghost weddings with dowries and banquets, while Qing dynasty legal codes explicitly forbade the desecration of graves for Ming Han. Proof the trade in corpses was rampant even then. Today, the line between tradition and crime blurs further. In 2019, a man in Shaanxi was executed for murdering two mentally disabled women, selling their bodies as ghost brides. Yet there's a poignant side to these spectral unions. For some families, Minghan is less about fear and more about closure. One mother in Henan spent years searching for a suitable wife for her son, who died in a construction accident at 22. When she finally found a young woman who'd perished in a car crash, she wept at the joint grave, whispering, "Now you won't be lonely." In these moments, the ritual transcends superstition, becoming a language of grief where love, not dread, moves the living to bend the rules of life and death. The Chinese government has cracked down, classifying corpse trafficking as a capital offense, and yet the practice persists in shadows. Maybe because ghost marriages hold up a mirror to our own fears of being forgotten, of dying unfinished. The dead, it seems, still crave what the living take for granted: companionship, recognition, a place to belong. And sometimes that hunger doesn't just haunt the afterlife, it reshapes the world of the living. The grasslands of Zululand erupt in a deafening roar as scores of warriors, their bodies glistening with sweat and ochre, charge toward a massive bull. This is Akwishwama, the Zulu first fruit ceremony, where unarmed men wrestle a beast to the ground with nothing but their bare hands, not for sport but to channel its raw life force into their king. The ritual unfolds like a living tapestry of muscle, dust, and blood, where every grunt, every strained tendon becomes a prayer for the nation's strength. According to Zulu cosmology, the bull's spirit doesn't die. It merges with the ruler's divine energy, ensuring fertile crops, military victory, and the very stability of the cosmos. Historical accounts describe the ceremony's precision. Young regiments or amabatho must subdue the animal without weapons, using coordinated grabs to immobilize its legs and twist its neck. The moment the bull collapses, its final breath coincides with the king's ceremonial tasting of the new harvest, symbolizing the transfer of vitality. 19th century missionary records note warriors smearing the beast's bile on their bodies, believing its courage would enter them through the skin. Even the bull's selection was sacred. Only pitch-black animals were chosen, their color representing the unity of the Zulu people under one monarch. Modern controversies have thrust Akwishwama into legal battles. Animal rights groups decry the method of killing, alleging prolonged suffering, while traditionalists argue Western perspectives fail to grasp the ritual's spiritual depth. In 2009, a high-profile court case attempted to ban the practice, only to be overturned after Zulu leaders testified that interrupting the ceremony would starve the king's ancestors. Scientists even weighed in, with veterinarians noting that the bull's death often occurs faster than in industrial slaughterhouses, where animals endure conveyor belts and stun guns. The ritual's political undertones add another layer. During apartheid, Ukwishwama became a covert act of resistance, a reaffirmation of Zulu identity under oppressive rule. Today, it's both cultural heritage and power play. Presidents and diplomats are invited to witness the event, tying their legitimacy to traditional authority. When a king like Msuzulu Zulu participates, he's not just honoring tradition. He's demonstrating control over the regiments that once shaped Southern Africa's destiny. Archaeologists find echoes of Ukwishwama in Iron Age sites, where cattle bones show ritualistic cuts matching descriptions of ceremonial feasts. But what fascinates scholars most isn't the act itself, it's the philosophy beneath it. The Zulu don't see humans as separate from nature, but as participants in an endless exchange of energy. The bull isn't a victim, it's a willing partner in a cycle as old as the grasslands themselves. When warriors whisper thanks into its ear before the final twist, they're acknowledging a truth modernity often forgets. That strength isn't taken but shared. On a scorching Good Friday in San Fernando, Philippines, the air thickens with the scent of sweat and incense as a man named Wilfredo Salvador raises his arms toward two villagers holding rusty nails. This isn't theater, it's real. The hammer falls, the crowd gasps, and for 20 agonizing minutes, Salvador hangs from a wooden cross, his feet dripping blood onto the dust below. He's one of dozens who volunteer for this brutal reenactment each year, a tradition that merges Catholic fervor with something far older, far darker, the ancient Filipino belief that suffering unlocks divine power. The roots of these crucifixions stretch back to Spanish colonization, when friars used graphic passion plays to convert locals. But scholars trace its intensity to pre-colonial animistic rituals where shamans endured ordeals to commune with spirits. In the highlands, warriors once walked on hot coals to prove their strength, while coastal tribes practiced bloodletting to appease sea gods. When Catholicism arrived, these traditions didn't vanish, they fused. The crucifix became a new vessel for an old idea. That pain could bridge the human and the holy. The Church officially condemns the practice. Bishops issue annual warnings, calling it a distortion of Christ's sacrifice. Yet in villages like Cutud, where the most extreme rites occur, local priests often turn a blind eye, even blessing participants beforehand. The tension mirrors a deeper conflict between institutional doctrine and folk devotion, between the Vatican's rules and the visceral faith of farmers who believe no prayer is as powerful as one written in blood. Modern penitents prepare for months, fasting and whipping their backs with bamboo strips until the skin shreds. Some, like Salvador, view it as penance for personal sins. Others pray for sick relatives or communal blessings. The nails, typically sterilized but unanesthetized, are driven through the palms contrary to historical crucifixion methods, which pierce the wrists to support body weight. Medical teams hover nearby, ready to lower the crucified after they reach their limit. The worst injuries aren't the nail wounds, but dislocations from hanging with arms stretched taut. What unsettles outsiders isn't just the violence, it's the celebration. Vendors sell ice cream beside crosses, children perch on parents' shoulders for a better view, and some participants smile beatifically through the pain. This juxtaposition reveals a cultural truth. In the Philippines, suffering and joy aren't opposites but companions. The same communities that stage these gruesome spectacles also throw the world's longest Christmas parties, where carols start in September. Anthropologists note parallels elsewhere: Spain's flagellant brotherhoods, Mexico's Via Crucis performances, but the Philippine version stands apart in its literalness. When asked why they don't just pretend, devotees cite a proverb: "Ang hindi marunong lumingon sa pinanggalingan, hindi makararating sa pararunan." Those who don't look back to their origins won't reach their destination. For them, faith isn't abstract. It must be felt in the hammer's blow, the wood splinters, the searing moment when the body screams and the spirit soars. The government walks a tightrope, allowing the rituals as cultural heritage while urging safety measures. In recent years, some penitents have substituted ropes for nails, but purists scoff. To them, the very point is the authenticity of suffering, the primal scream that echoes both Calvary and the ancestral chants of shamans long gone. As the sun sets over San Fernando, the cross is empty, the wounds are bandaged, and the village prepares for next year's ordeal, a cycle as old as humanity's search for meaning in the knife's edge between agony and transcendence. Beneath the pale northern lights, flames devour the hull of a Viking longship as it drifts into the frigid waters of the Norwegian fjord. On its deck lies a chieftain clad in his finest armor, surrounded by slaughtered horses, hunting dogs, and even the body of a young woman, his sacrificed thrall, condemned to serve him in the afterlife. This was no mere funeral. It was a cosmic launch sequence, a ritual designed to propel the dead into the halls of Valhalla with all the fury and spectacle befitting a warrior's exit. The Oseberg ship, unearthed in 1904, remains the most astonishing window into these rites. Buried in blue clay that preserved it for over 1,000 years, the vessel contained 2 women, one likely a queen, the other possibly her enslaved attendant, alongside a trove of treasures, carved wooden sledges, tapestries depicting mystic processions, even a bucket of wild apples for the journey. Most haunting were the animal remains: 15 horses, 6 dogs, and 2 oxen, all decapitated with ritual precision. Forensic analysis revealed the younger woman's collarbone had been severed, suggesting violent sacrifice rather than natural death. What set Viking ship burials apart wasn't just the opulence, but the layered symbolism. The longship itself mirrored Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged steed capable of traversing the 9 realms. Its orientation, often pointing westward toward the mythical sea of Nastrond, was no accident. Sagas describe this as the route to Valhalla, where the ship would become a vessel both literal and metaphysical. The sacrificed animals weren't just provisions, they were guides. Horses associated with Freyja's afterlife field Folkvanga could carry the dead, while dogs like Odin's wolves Jerry and Freki were thought to sniff out the path through the underworld. Recent LiDAR scans of burial sites in Sweden reveal even darker complexities. At Valsgärd, archaeologists found ships buried with weapons deliberately bent or broken, a practice once dismissed as ritual destruction, now understood as killing the items to release their spirits for the afterlife. Some graves show thralls buried with their feet severed, possibly to prevent them from fleeing their posthumous servitude. The Gokstad ship went further, interring 12 men around the chieftain's burial chamber like a ghastly honor guard, their skeletons arranged in poses suggesting they'd been bound before death. The psychology behind these rituals cuts to the Viking worldview's core. Death wasn't an end, but a voyage requiring careful logistical planning. A 10th century Arab traveler, Ahmad ibn Fadlan, witnessed a Rus Viking funeral on the Volga and described how the chieftain's thrall volunteered for sacrifice after a ritual involving psychedelic mushrooms, only to be strangled and stabbed by an angel of death before the pyre was lit. His account, though filtered through foreign eyes, captures the terrifying intimacy of these send-offs, where the living actively participated in ushering the dead into the next world. Modern debates swirl around these practices. Some scholars argue the sacrificed were willing participants, their deaths framed as a sacred honor. Others point to DNA evidence from sites like Flakstad, Norway, where thralls in burial mounds showed signs of malnutrition and blunt force trauma, suggesting coercion. The truth may lie in the middle, a culture where belief and brutality intertwined seamlessly. where the promise of an eternal feast in Valhalla justified horrors that would shudder modern sensibilities. What lingers today isn't just the spectacle, but the Vikings' unflinching confrontation with mortality. When museum visitors gaze at the Oseberg ship's serpentine prow, they're seeing more than a relic. They're witnessing a masterclass in existential theater. Every nail hammered, every animal slain, every thrall placed aboard was part of an audacious gamble, that through ritual even death could be outfought, outwitted, and outsailed. The longships may have rotted away, but their lesson endures how far a civilization will go to convince itself that the end is just another beginning. Beneath the swaying palms of rural Haiti, a man lies motionless in a tomb, his breath undetectable, his pulse vanished. To doctors, he's a corpse. To his family, he's buried and mourned. But to the Baka, the Vodou priest standing over his grave by moonlight, he's something far more terrifying, a candidate for resurrection. This is zombification, stripped of Hollywood's shambling corpses and supernatural curses. The real ritual is a chilling fusion of neurotoxic poisoning, psychological trauma, and one of history's darkest legacies, the unending nightmare of slavery. At the heart of zombification lies tetrodotoxin, a deadly compound found in pufferfish and certain toad species. When administered in precise doses by skilled Bakas, it mimics clinical death, slowing the heart to near stillness and paralyzing muscles while leaving the victim fully conscious. Ethnobotanist Wade Davis uncovered this in the 1980s when he obtained zombie powder samples used by priests. The concoction contained ground bones, human remains, and most crucially, traces of tetrodotoxin. Victims buried alive would later be revived with hallucinogenic datura plants, leaving them in a suggestible, brain-damaged state, ripe for exploitation as plantation laborers. But the toxin alone doesn't explain zombification's cultural power. Its roots coil deep into Haiti's history of colonial brutality. Enslaved Africans watched as overseers buried people alive for minor infractions, a horror immortalized in folk songs about the walking dead. When these traumatized populations rebelled in 1804, creating the world's first free Black Republic, the fear of premature burial didn't vanish. It mutated. The Bakas weaponized that terror, turning slavers' cruelty into a tool of social control. A man could now be punished without bloodshed, declared dead, then resurrected into servitude that mirrored slavery itself. Modern cases reveal the ritual's lingering trauma. In 1980, a woman named Clavius Narcissus stunned her village by reappearing 18 years after her burial. Medical records confirmed she'd been pronounced dead at a hospital, yet she recounted being conscious during her own funeral, paralyzed but aware of the nails hammering her coffin shut. Narcissus claimed a Baka had enslaved her on a sugar plantation until his death freed her. While skeptics dismiss her story, neurologists confirm tetrodotoxin could produce exactly such a waking death. What makes zombification uniquely unsettling isn't its pharmacology, it's the psychological genius of its design. By exploiting universal fears of conscious burial and loss of autonomy, Bakas created a self-perpetuating myth. The mere threat of zombification could enforce social order, much like European witch trials. Families sometimes mutilated corpses, smashing skulls or sewing lips shut to prevent Bakas from stealing them. This practice continues today in remote villages where fresh graves show signs of tampering long after funerals. The ritual's true horror lies in its inversion of liberation theology. Vodou, born from resistance to slavery, birthed a punishment that mirrored the master's whip. The zombie isn't just a monster, it's a walking monument to trauma, proof that even freedom can't always exorcise the past. When Narcissus described her years of servitude, she didn't speak of magic, just the endless cane fields, the scorching sun, and the slow realization that some chains outlast death itself. The scorching prairie sun beats down on a circle of dancers, their bare feet pounding the packed earth in rhythm with drums that sound like the heartbeat of the land itself. Each man's chest is pierced with wooden skewers, tethered by ropes to a towering cottonwood pole, the sacred tree of life. As they strain against the bonds, flesh tearing with every movement, their eyes remain fixed on the horizon, seeking what the Lakota call Hanbalchaya, a vision that will guide their people. This is the sun dance, the most sacred rite of the Plains tribes, a ritual of sacrifice, endurance, and rebirth that was nearly erased by colonial force, only to rise again like the sun itself. For centuries, the sun dance united tribes from the Lakota to the Cheyenne, each adding their own layers of meaning. The ceremony typically coincided with the summer solstice, when the sun's power was strongest. Participants purified themselves in sweat lodges, then entered the dance arena, a circular space representing the cosmos. The central pole, often adorned with buffalo skulls and prayer cloths, symbolized the axis between earth and sky. Dancers fasted for days, their bodies pushed to the brink, while elders chanted prayers for healing, unity, and the renewal of all life. The piercings were no mere test of pain tolerance. They embodied a covenant between the individual and the divine. By offering their flesh, dancers took on the suffering of their community, transforming agony into a conduit for spiritual power. Then came the crackdown. In the late 19th century, as the U.S. government sought to dismantle native resistance, federal agents targeted the sun dance as a barbaric practice. The 1883 Code of Indian Crimes outlawed it outright, alongside other ceremonies. Dancers were imprisoned, sacred objects confiscated or burned. Authorities justified the ban by fixating on the ritual's physical extremes, ignoring its deeper purpose. The same way colonizers had misinterpreted the Maya ballgame as mere blood sport. But underground, the dance survived. Elders whispered its steps to children, and in remote areas, small groups risked imprisonment to keep the tradition alive. The revival began in the mid-20th century, fueled by the American Indian movement's cultural resurgence. In 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act relaxed some restrictions, but it wasn't until the 1970s that public sun dances re-emerged, now inflected with new urgency. Modern participants often describe the ritual as an act of defiance, not just against historical oppression, but against the ongoing erasure of indigenous spirituality. The piercings, once a personal quest for visions, became political statements, a refusal to let colonial wounds define native identity. Today, the sun dance exists in dual forms. Some tribes, like the Shoshone, avoid piercings altogether, emphasizing prayer and dance. Others, including certain Lakota communities, adhere strictly to ancestral methods, using buffalo bone skewers and ropes made of twisted rawhide. Medical professionals sometimes assist to prevent infection, a pragmatic adaptation that sparked debate. Traditionalists argue that sanitizing the ritual dilutes its power, while reformers counter that survival itself is an act of resistance. What unsettles outsiders isn't just the physical ordeal, it's the ritual's radical perspective on pain. In a culture that medicates discomfort at every turn, the sun dance insists that suffering can be sacred, that endurance isn't just punishment but prayer. When a dancer finally breaks free from the skewers, the scars left behind aren't seen as mutilation, but as maps of transformation. The sun dance doesn't just defy logic, it challenges the very way we understand the relationship between bodies, pain, and the divine. And as long as the sun rises, it will keep asking, what are you willing to endure for what you believe in? High in the Himalayan peaks, where the wind howls like a chorus of hungry spirits, a lone monk sits cross-legged on a frozen ledge. In his hands, he holds a drum made from human skulls and a trumpet fashioned from a femur. This is the churd ritual, one of Tibetan Buddhism's most radical practices, where monks don't fight their deepest fears, they invite them to a feast. And the main course, their own flesh. The ritual begins with a visualization so vivid it blurs the line between meditation and reality. The monk pictures their body dissolving into light, then transforming into an offering of unimaginable generosity, mountains of steaming organs, rivers of blood, a banquet for every demon, ghost, and malevolent force lurking in the shadows. The drum's hollow beat guides the trance, while the thigh-bone trumpet's eerie wail calls forth the very entities most cultures spend lifetimes running from. But here's the twist: these aren't just macabre fantasies. Churd, which translates to cutting, is a surgical strike on the root of suffering, the illusion that we are separate, permanent, and solid. Its origins trace back to the 11th century Yogini Machig Labdrön, a revolutionary figure who turned Buddhist philosophy inside out. While most traditions seek to purify or vanquish negative forces, she taught that demons are nothing more than manifestations of our own clinging. Hunger spirits represent insatiable desire, wrathful deities embody repressed anger, and the terrifying Lord of Death symbolizes our paralyzing fear of impermanence. By offering their bodies willingly, practitioners perform the ultimate act of defiance against ego, proving that even the most primal terror annihilation holds no power over a mind trained in radical acceptance. Modern neuroscience offers a fascinating parallel. Brain scans of advanced Churd practitioners show decreased activity in the amygdala, the fear center, when exposed to disturbing stimuli. It's as if the ritual rewires the mind to greet horror with calm curiosity. Some monks describe reaching a point where the visualization flips. The demons they once feared reveal themselves as protectors, and the act of self-sacrifice becomes an ecstatic surrender to interconnectedness. Yet Churd isn't just for hermits in caves. In Tibetan communities, lay practitioners use simplified versions to confront everyday struggles, chronic pain, grief, even workplace stress. The core lesson remains: what we resist persists. By feeding our metaphorical demons, whether they take the form of insecurity, loss, or failure, we rob them of their power. The femur trumpet's blast becomes a wake-up call, reminding us that the things we fear most are often the gateways to our deepest freedom. The ritual's brilliance lies in its paradox. By staring into the abyss with open hands instead of clenched fists, the Churd practitioner discovers that the abyss was never really there, just endless space, luminous and unbroken. And in that space, even the hungriest ghost can become a teacher. Deep in the Black Forest, where moonlight struggles to pierce the ancient canopy, a gathering of misfits and outcasts dances around a fire that burns an unnatural green. They've smeared their bodies with a foul-smelling ointment that makes the stars bleed into trails of light, and when a horned figure steps from the shadows, they don't scream, they kneel. At least, that's what the torturers wanted you to believe. The European witch's Sabbath, as recorded in trial confessions and propaganda woodcuts, wasn't just folklore. It was a nightmare stitched together from fear, prejudice, and the desperate pleas of victims under the rack. The flying ointments described in these confessions weren't mere fantasy. Modern chemical analysis of surviving recipes reveals a chilling truth. They contain deadly nightshade, henbane, and mandrake plants loaded with tropane alkaloids that induce hallucinations of flight and metamorphosis. A 16th century midwife named Walpurga Horsmanin confessed under torture to rubbing this paste on her broomstick, not realizing the drugs were dissolving through her skin, sending her into visions so vivid she believed she'd attended a Sabbath in her sleep. The real horror: these ointments likely predated the witch trials by centuries. Shamanic traditions across Europe used similar concoctions for spiritual journeys, but in the hands of inquisitors, they became proof of demonic allegiance. Then there were the pacts scrawled in blood, signed upside down, and allegedly granting witches supernatural powers in exchange for their souls. Trial records describe these contracts in absurd detail. The devil's claw-tipped hand guiding the quill, the parchment that burned cold to the touch. Yet the surviving examples, like the one attributed to Urbane Grandier in the Loudon possessions, are obvious forgeries written in Latin far too clumsy for an educated priest. The irony, the concept of sign pacts may have been borrowed from actual medieval traditions. Land deeds and legal oaths were often solemnized with blood seals, a practice the Church twisted into evidence of heresy. But the most politically charged element was the Black Mass, a grotesque parody of the Eucharist where sacramental wine became urine and the host was stamped with obscenities. Here, the accusations reveal more about the accusers than the accused. Desecrating the Eucharist was the ultimate heresy in a society where the host was believed to literally transform into Christ's flesh. By painting witches as host stabbers, authorities justified extreme measures to protect sacred objects. The twist, some underground sects like the Gnostic Cathars did reject church doctrine, but their rituals bore no resemblance to the satanic caricatures. The Sabbath's inverted Mass was pure projection, a dark mirror of the Church's own anxieties about losing control over the divine. Archaeology adds another layer to this tangled history. In 2014, builders in Rhineland-Pfalz discovered a hidden cellar beneath a farmhouse, its walls covered in protective sigils and a pentagram etched into the floor. At first glance, it seemed to confirm Sabbath legends until dendrochronology dated the carvings to the 1800s, long after the witch trials ended. This wasn't a satanic temple, it was a witch's cabinet designed to ward off the very persecutions that had inspired its symbols. The oppressed had appropriated the imagery of their oppressors, turning accusations of evil into talismans against evil. The witch's Sabbath's greatest tragedy wasn't its brutality, but its banality. Most confessions followed identical scripts recycled from one trial to the next. A French judge named Pierre de Lanca even published a handbook for identifying Sabbaths, complete with illustrations of witches kissing goats. These stereotypes became self-fulfilling prophecies. Once you knew what a witch was supposed to do, any eccentricity could be twisted to fit. An old woman talking to her cat, obviously a familiar, a midwife using belladonna for pain relief, clearly a flying potion. The Sabbath wasn't just a myth, it was a machine for manufacturing enemies, one that could target anyone from herbalists to political dissidents. And that's what makes these rituals so enduringly haunting. They weren't just about witches, they were about power. When authorities described orgies with demons, they reinforced moral control. When they spoke of infanticide, they justified regulating women's bodies. Even the flying ointment served a purpose. By framing altered states as diabolical, the Church monopolized access to transcendence. The Sabbath was the ultimate other, a collective nightmare used to police boundaries and purge undesirables. Its legacy lingers in every conspiracy theory that paints outsiders as devil worshippers, in every moral panic that confuses difference with danger. The fires may have died out, but the shadows they cast still dance on our walls. From the sacred heights of Tibetan sky burials to the blood-stained sands of Aztec sacrifices, the rituals we've explored today aren't just relics of the past, they're mirrors reflecting humanity's unshakable need to make sense of the unknown. Whether through dance, devotion, or even self-inflicted pain, every culture has carved its own path to the divine, the communal, or the cosmic. Some practices shock us, others move us, but all share one thread: the raw, unfiltered creativity of human belief. Think about it. The same species that invented smartphones once believed the fate of the universe depended on a chief sliding naked down a muddy hill or a king's ability to please a goddess in the most intimate way possible. These rituals weren't just superstitions, they were the operating systems of entire civilizations, coding values, fears, and hopes into actions that still echo across centuries. The Vikings sent their dead sailing into the afterlife with every comfort, while the Ainu wept as they sent a beloved bear back to the mountain gods. One culture's horror is another's holiness, and that's the real magic of history. It refuses to fit neatly into our modern boxes. So which ritual stuck with you? Was it the bone-chilling precision of the Blood Eagle, or the heartbreaking tenderness of ghost marriages reuniting lost souls? Maybe you couldn't look away from the hallucinogenic chaos of the Bacchanalia or the serene logic of sky burials returning dust to the wind. Drop your favorites in the comments. We're endlessly curious about what sparks your imagination. And this is just the beginning. Beyond these 25 rituals lie vaults of historical mysteries waiting to be cracked open. Lost civilizations, unsolved artifacts, and ceremonies so secret their true meanings died with their last practitioners. If you're hungry for more deep dives into the unexplained, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because history isn't just a textbook. It's a living, breathing puzzle, and we've only just begun to piece it together. Until next time, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember, the past is always stranger than you think.